Live. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We have a really good bunch of content for you, brought to you with Milen Epic. She runs all of our services projects. Many people don't realize, but Lingoport provides a whole lot of services in addition to software all around globalization for software. So internationalization analysis, gap analysis, actual large scale and small scale I18n projects and the like. So, we will internationalize an application, we will provide advice, we will do all kinds of things in that area for continuous localization as well. So Milen has been doing this. I met Milen before I even started Lingoport doing this, and she's one of the many Boulder-based experts around localization. And so very cool to have her join Lingoport actually a couple of years ago, and then be running things. So she's got some really good content for you. Now, the number one question that people ask when we get started is, will the recording be available? Yes, it will. There's nothing you have to do to get to the recording. You don't even have to ask for it. You'll get a follow-up email that will have a recording link that you can then play at your leisure. So if you have to leave early, do that for sure. But if you can, stay on. Expect a good Q&A. And speaking of Q&A, you can use within Zoom, I'm sure you're all very good at Zoom at this point, but there's a Q&A interface. You can use that. If you use the chat, I don't mind. We'll check both and we'll go. And if you've got like a difficult question that, you sort of have trouble articulating and writing, we can promote you so that you can speak live if you're willing to do that. We're always happy to make that happen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Milen, and we'll go from there. I'm going to turn off my camera and be silent. Again, I never introduced myself. My name's Asnes. I founded and run Lingoport. And then, of course, Milen, who runs all of our service projects. Thank you, and go for it, Milen.
Okay, thank you, Adam, and welcome everyone to our webinar on internationalization bugs. Let's see, my slides are, okay. Today, we'll talk about typical internationalization bugs, and I'll make some recommendations along the way to help you with your efforts. But let's get started with some definitions. When you take any product globally, you're actually doing globalization. And in the process of doing that, you'll end up creating localized versions for each of your target markets. What's different with software is that in addition to doing localization, there is a step before that, which is internationalization, which is a must. So there are two steps to the process of going global with globalization: internationalization, I18n, localization, L10n. What's the difference between the two of them? Well, localization focuses on translating and adapting the content of your software application. But that content is typically inside the code, in the lines of code, like strings are embedded in there. They need to be extracted out. So there's work to be done on the code part, whether it's written in Python and Java and C++, whatever the programming language is, not only to extract that content so that it can go to localization, but actually there's a whole lot more to do to make sure that the running application is going to be presenting information in a way that fits the customer, the end users, language and cultural expectations. So the difference really, again, what I've highlighted here is localization is on content and internationalization is on the coding side. These two activities, internationalization and localization, are very dependent on one another. If you don't do any internationalization, you actually can't get started with localization because you won't have the content to start translating and adapting. But most of what we see is that customers or development teams have done some internationalization. It's just that it's not complete. And if it's not complete, honestly, that's bad internationalization. Bad internationalization will end up with a badly localized final product. And typically, the first thought is, oh, there are localization problems. But the fault is typically not the localization companies or not translators, but it is because the application was not fully internationalized. Below you can see several different examples, maybe corrupted characters, text not fitting on buttons, lack of cultural adaptation, but let's just dive into these, so don't try to read them here. So let's dive into character corruption. So what you see in the screen below is that the end user is trying to enter their address. It's a German address, Königstrasse in Munich. There are umlauted characters they're trying to enter, yet the application cannot display that. There are corrupted characters, these little square boxes you see. It's a term we call in internationalization moshibake, a Japanese word. So if your application is not able to support the character set and encodings of different languages, anything beyond ASCII, and you have this kind of a presentation, your final product will fail in the localized markets. So this is definitely a very big problem that needs to be fixed from the very beginning. Another aspect, again, outside of the hands of localization teams, is that there is presentation to a user that is coming from the code. If you look at the right-hand side, we have calendars displayed, which is quite typical in a date picker application. You ask somebody to pick, oh, when do you want this to be shipped, for example. But in the US case, the calendar needs to start with a Sunday because that's how our weeks start here in the US. But if you go to the UK, the first day of the week is Monday. So you need to adapt that presentation to show the calendar the way your users in Britain would expect it to see. Most of Europe does start their week on a Monday, but now if you go to the Middle East, especially Muslim countries, many of them actually they start on a Friday, except like Egypt and Bahrain and a few others, they start on Saturday. So you want to be able to have internationalization support to display these calendars the way the localized markets expect them to be. Now, on the left-hand side, we see a form, very typical. We gather information in our software applications about the users. We ask for their name, their address, phone number, and sometimes even information about, let's say, what their education level is. But if you do ask, for example, about their education level, does these levels match across one culture to another? They typically don't. So you have to consider what that is in each of the countries and adapt your coding according to that. This example doesn't ask about education levels, but it does ask about the first and last name, which by itself is a problem because not every country has two names. Indonesia has only one name. In Spanish-speaking parts, such in Latin America, there are also two last names. Then speaking about the address, here there is an assumption of how an address is being sorted. We have a state first, followed by a zip. But if you go to Norway, the zip needs to come before the state. And is there always a state? Sometimes there is no state. Maybe there is a province, or there is some other similar concept to it. But even though maybe you can change the name, the abbreviations for the state or the number of digits required for a zip, or maybe is it digits or number combinations? How are you going to parse that? All that varies greatly. In fact, something as simple as a phone number, what we see here is the 10-digit US phone number broken down into 3, 3, and 4 digits is not how it's represented in other parts. Take France, for example, the digits are grouped by 2. Even taking something as simple as a number, even number formatting needs to be adapted per target locale, locale being the country and the language combination. Decimal separators, whether that's a dot or a comma, 1,000 separators, is it a dot, a comma, or is it anything different, like the Swiss and French example? The grouping of the digits, are they always by groups of 3? Well, not always. Take a look at the Indian example. Or in Japan, there's also grouping by 10,000, 10,000 separators. The placement also of a percentage sign, whether it comes before or after the number, or a negative number if the minus comes before or after, or are there even other ways to indicate that a number is negative, maybe by using parentheses or color coding? Lots to consider just with numbers. And it's not only the displaying of the numbers, but it's also parsing of user input. In the example below, there is 12,50. So a French user is trying to enter 12.5 degrees to a conversion. If that cannot be parsed, it's going to be very frustrating for the user. So again, with these formatting for everything, whether it's number or some other formatting we're going to cover, there's always 2 parts of it. One is, how do you display it? And the other is, if the end user has to enter it, can you handle that? Currencies, there is also formatting involved here. And the number part is formatted just like what we covered, but the placement of where the currency symbol goes varies based on the locale, whether there's a space or not, that changes as well. Beyond that, part of what is important to remember is that what determines the formatting of the currency is not the currency itself. You won't say, oh, it's actually US dollars, therefore I will format it as US dollars. No, it is actually what the user's preferences are that will determine what the culture is and how the user expects to see it. And that's our Canadian example here. It's one country, it's the same Canadian dollar, but the presentation changes based on the user's preferred culture. It's also better to use 3-letter abbreviations like USD or CAD for Canadian dollar, US dollar, if we're dealing with multiple currencies in an application, because a dollar sign is used in more than one country for different currencies. Also with multiple currencies, and this is getting a little bit into the weed, but just to give you an idea, you need to carry alongside with the number the actual currency unit in your software logic. So maybe you're calculating, in this case, a labor cost. And your calculations go from one module, one function that calls another function, and you keep passing the number, and this thing gets calculated and then displayed. Just passing along the number is not sufficient. In multi-currency applications, you also need to pass along the currency unit. And what we see in the example below is that that wasn't done. and the default $sign started creeping in. That creates a very confusing experience for the end user, which makes, again, the product not quite acceptable. It's time, yes, yet another type of formatting. The example below shows for a German speaker that the date is being shown here for a US English person. Not only should March be translated, but 13 needs to come before the equivalent of March, followed by the year. The other hidden part in this example is that users are going to always assume that the date and the time that's being presented to them, let's say this is March 13, 2023, 11:50 p.m. Is this for their own time zone? They will assume it is, but oftentimes, especially with e-commerce applications, say the time when the purchasing happened is stored in a database in a universal time format in UTC, but when you present it to the end user, you need to consider that you need to do time zone conversions. We talked about needing to extract strings from software code. Well, if you don't, or if you partially do that and you miss some strings, then you end up with an application that has English in the middle of the rest of the translated text. Obviously, this is not the fault of the translator. They couldn't translate it because they actually never got this, this paragraph that you see below. So something as simple as not extracting a string causes big issues. In fact, it is a reason to hold back a release, because if you don't hold back the release and fix these issues, your product risks being rejected in the target market. Strings don't come only from inside the code, not from your codes of line. Oftentimes, there is also content that is displayed to the users that comes from a database. So those need to also be translated, and we need a place to store them. Please don't do is our second example here. Sometimes developers like to just use a shortcut, and they will use the column names in the database and just display those. Well, the problem is the column names are not going to be translatable. There's not going to be a place where we can find the equivalent of it, unless if you don't rely on the column name, but you stored what it is that you want to say on the different drop downs here elsewhere, and then we can bring in the right translation in place. So databases, again, typically a lot of that comes also in selection controls like drop-down boxes, list boxes. Yeah, a lot to be thoughtful about when it comes to databases. Static file references, applications typically also use some images in them. They might be calling audios and some videos. There might be a link to a license agreement. So all of these external files need to be created in the language and cultural expectation. Like in terms of an image, you need to have the right image that fits that culture. And they need to be brought in, dynamically in the running application based on what the locale is. So in the example here below, this is a textual image. Because there is text, it needs to be translated. And when you translate it, you've created now a Japanese version of it. At the same time, the font has been adjusted, the color has been adjusted. In any case, you now have two different images. If the end user is a US English user, you'll have to show the top image. If not, if it's a Japanese user, then you need to show the second image, and so forth. And with license agreements or terms agreements, it's the same thing. You need to make sure that what you present to your user is going to be the agreement, the file, the agreement that they can read in their own language that has previously translated. But the software needs to make the necessary adjustment to bring in the right asset, the right static file. Some other examples of cultural appearances. We talked about font a moment ago and color. With color, we may need to adjust the colors when we localize because of what colors mean, like white in English, in our locale, in the Western world means pure, but it means death. In Japan, you might choose red because in China that means happiness, but red in Egypt will mean death. So even little nuances like that needs adjustment. And in terms of pictures, we often like to use some sports images here to represent some activity. I've actually seen an example where the size of an item was described as a sports item that was not like a football, that does not carry across different locales. So these need to be, again, changeable. And when it comes to the owl, which means wisdom, here for us, that in some locales that means witchcraft. So we need to be very careful on how we select icons. If you can use universal ones, such as traffic signals, that might work. Otherwise, expect that you need to extract those and also bring them in as locale-specific assets. Emails, many applications create dynamic email notifications. And there are three parts to an email. There is the content in the email that needs to come, that needs to be translated and presented in language. But inside that content, there might also be some, say, dates that are being presented dynamically, comes from the software code. So that means that the code that prepares the email needs to be internationalized. Its content, if it's static, any part of it needs to be translated. But additionally, also the templates itself need to be localized. In this example, the problem is that the template was forgotten. So you have the from, to, and all these other parts of the template, like email comments, remaining in English, and that's a problem. Here we're looking at concatenations. Concatenations is quite a big problem. And I would actually wonder how many of you have come across concatenation problems. And the reason why it is a problem is that software developers are trained from the very beginning that they can take parts of strings and put them together to create a longer sentence. While that works in one language, typically we see that software is written here in English and we put these two together, but it doesn't work for other languages because of word order differences. So while English and many Romance languages have a subject, verb, object order, you go to Japanese or Turkish, the verb needs to come at the end. And other orderings also exist. Beyond the subject, verb, object ordering, concatenations are a problem because of other intricate differences between languages. In the first example, we see that red table becomes la table rouge in French, which means that the placement of the adjective, whether it comes before or after, is also not the same across languages, or there might be even exceptions in one language. It might be one way in one case and in a different way in a different case. So just making assumptions that you can bring these things together by appending them or by concatenating parts doesn't work. Genders are a problem. Genders and plurals affect Romance languages because a plural, it does not affect only the noun, but it also affects adjectives and adverbs in Romance languages. And plural forms is a big topic. In English, we use a singular form only when we have one of something. But if we have zero or more than one, it's always the plural form. And we just add an S as a shortcut. Developers like to put parentheses S, sounds great. But that doesn't work for other languages. Example here is Slavic languages, where the plural is different for zero versus few versus many or more than many. So you need a different solution than using parentheses S. We'll talk about that in a later slide on what it is that you can do. And it can get even more complicated. Take Turkish, for example. The plural depends not only on the number, but also on the vowel harmony rule. So if the previous letters had a hard vowel, then you need to use one kind of ending. And with soft ones, you need to use a different kind of ending. So the solution to this is to provide as much context as possible to translators, not only for pluralization, but for all of these issues that I've mentioned that come up with concatenations. If you can have a complete sentence with all of the contextual information in there, then translators in the process of localization would know how to do this right. This particular slide talks about UI layouts. Different languages have different expansion values. You could test for all of them, but in general, we do provide these recommendations with short words. Typically, you should plan on your real estate on your screen to allow like 3 times as much expansion room. Take German, for instance, it uses a lot of long words. That's because nouns get compounded together. So you end up having like multiple nouns put together and a stream of letters. It looks like a train sometimes. It won't fit. And therefore you need to plan for the expansion. For longer text, typically Spanish is a language that has more expansion because there's a lot of small words like de la, para, in the middle of the text that expands it. Sorting, a different language has a different alphabet, it has different letters, and therefore the sort order is not just A through Z. Take, for example, German. It has these umlauted characters, which are also existing in Swedish. But just because the same characters exist, it doesn't mean that they fit in the same order, in the sort order. In Swedish, for example, these umlauted characters are mainly at the end, except for the U umlaut, the U's come a little before. But in German, if you're looking for an A umlaut character, it's not going to be in the beginning, but you need to look for those in the A's. It's treated as if it's a case, like a lowercase or an uppercase. You would look for them inside the A list in a dictionary. Same with an umlauted A. All right. So I've run through several issues, but there are so many more that it's hard to go through all of them. I've gone through some of the most common ones, but I want to mention that there are many, many more. We haven't talked about searching, filtering, right to left or bidirectional languages. We haven't talked about input method editors for entering different languages. And another one we didn't talk about here is units of measure and conversion. If you're using pounds and inches in the US, in a different country, you go to Europe, you need to convert to the metric system, to kilograms and meters and centimeters. That might require you to do sometimes dynamic conversions, but it may also require you to go back to your databases and catalogs and make sure you have the equivalent representation of what it is you want to show to your users in the metric system that they understand. So there are a lot of issues, but it's also complex to solve internationalization issues. We are concerned with showing end users a presentation or a UI that fits their expectation, their language, their cultural norms. But that doesn't mean that only the presentation layer of a software architecture is affected, because the business logic is a layer below. But just like in the example I gave you before with carrying the currency unit alongside the number, as you're making these calculations and you're passing values from one function to another, you might end up a lot deeper in your application, and issues that affect internationalization are in all of these, including external systems or third-party systems. Your application might be using, say, a reporting function or a printing application from another party. You need to see whether they support internationalization or what it is you need to do to turn it on. And if that's not possible, you may need to change the third-party application you're using so that you can reach your global markets. So a lot and complex, and deep. What we recommend is you start early. If you can think about internationalization issues early on, from the time of the conception of your product, if you have that luxury, the sooner you do, the less it will cost to resolve them. If you look at them during design and adapt your design, they'll cost you a little bit more because it wasn't there in conception. But if you wait until the very end, the development is finished, the localization is done, you go to testing, you're just about to release, and that's when you find your bugs. This is when it's going to be the most costly. So start early. Not starting early, here are some other recommendations. Not all, but some to get you started. First of all, we strongly recommend that you enable Unicode. If you still have Latin 1 or ASCII 7, that's very limiting. But even if you will go, say, to a different, a single language, say Spanish, and you can get by without going to Unicode, but something else, we still recommend you go to Unicode, because once you support Unicode, you will be able to go to any other languages down the road. And enabling Unicode is not only in the application code. You need to make sure that the databases are also supporting Unicode, typically UTF-8. And Also, as I mentioned before, check that your third-party tools, external systems also do support it. Second recommendation, in order to be able to show the right presentation, whether it's formatting or it's the right image, you want to be able to do a few things. One is you need to first determine what is the user's locale. We call that locale negotiation. You might determine the user locale based on their user preferences, if they are registered users and you have some information about them. If not, it could be based on what they've selected from the browser when they came to your site, if this is a web application. But there are other ways as well. It could be based on cookies. It could be based on looking at which URL and where they're coming from. So you need to build the logic of how you're going to determine the locale and the prioritization. And that's basically the locale negotiations. Once you know the end user's locale, then you need to use locale methods where a locale variable is passed as a parameter. So if you're going to print a number, make sure you use the locale method to print the number and you pass the locale in it. So the right formatting happens with numbers, with currency, with dates and times, etc. And there might be some missing frameworks. So depending on what your combination of technologies or programming languages are, you might not have all of the frameworks necessary for bringing local resources. So strings, for example, get extracted and put in resource files or property files. But depending on, say you're using, if you're using Java property files. But when you use a lot of different combinations between React and Kotlin and a whole soup of different technologies, it might be that not everything has the frameworks you need. There might also be missing frameworks for supporting plurals or doing parsing, and you will need to build that solution so that the rest of the code can use it. And don't forget about also conversions, date, time, currency may be coming in, or even conversions for the metric system, as we've mentioned. And with strings, you need to make sure that all strings are being extracted, they're put in resource files. When you do so, the string IDs need to be unique, but extracting the string is not enough. You also now need to go back to your code, refactor it so that it can now pull in the string from the resource file dynamically based on the unique string ID and again, the locale. Strings also come from the database. So you need to think about if you've got a table that is presented to the user and it's in language, then you need to have a place to store each of your localized or translated different strings. That means that your schemas in your database will need to be updated so that you know where to store them. Also, don't forget about stored procedures, because stored procedures is code, and they might have hard-coded strings in there, so those need to be handled as well. Concatenations, very big, very important topic. So don't do it. Instead of concatenating, instead of taking one string and then appending a second string, this is like I accept maybe the terms and conditions agreement, or I accept the license agreement. You should use insertion points instead. I accept, and here comes your variable with an insertion point. And the reason why this is much better is that the translator, instead of receiving something called I accept, but they don't know what comes after that, they will see this entire complete thought, and they will know that some agreement name comes in here, and they can they can now create correct translation that is going to take care of all the agreements and conjugations as appropriate. When using these variables, please use meaningful ones, again, to be able to provide more context to the translators instead of using some numbers like, oh, my first parameter in this string, not good, say what you mean. And for pluralization, we're lucky to have the ICU message formats these days. And in this case, I have given you an example of how to do pluralization for English, where you have what you put in if it's singular versus plural. And then for a Slavic language such as Ukrainian, you can see that there are many different options based on what it is. So do look into the ICU message format solution. Sometimes though, with UI screen layouts, there is a sentence and you expect the user to type in some number. We recommend you don't do that in the middle of the sentence, because this is not a variable that the translator can move around. So have the complete part of the wording on one side with colon, and then have the user enter the information that they need. And on pseudo localization, this is something we recommend between completing the development and going to localization. You can test if all the strings have been extracted by applying pseudo localization. And what we do is we like to mark the English characters with some accented version of them so that it's still readable. We apply expansion and we check with different types of character sets against corruption. How this helps is we can interpret the different results of pseudo localization. If there is any string that has no marking, we know that this was missed. There is a hard-coded string that had not been extracted. So before this goes to localization, developers can go immediately and find that missing string and extract it and fix it. We put these square brackets around each of the strings. So if you see that there's a close and an opening, you know there's a concatenation, you can go fix that immediately before it goes to localization. Corrupted characters can be found as such here. And if there is no closing square bracket, this means that the string is a lot longer and there's a truncation. So it's an easy way to do a test before localization begins. Overall recommendations, before you get started, we recommend that you assess the effort. You get some statistics so that you can plan and resource it appropriately. Always do a top-down approach. Look at the architecture, including the databases and third-party tools. Build the missing frameworks, and then go through lines and lines of code and fix whatever issues you have. And to find the issues, we do recommend static analysis, where you can scan the code, and that's actually one of our tools. I'll talk about it in a second. You can also do pseudo localization, like I've shown you. And software development always uses unit tests. Internationalization is just another discipline in software development, so you need to develop unit tests for code that you've internationalized as well. All right. So as you do that, if you need any help, let us know. We'll be happy to help you, both with planning and assessment services. We can help do the implementation by providing more resources, or maybe help you by providing you guidelines so that you can do it based on those guidelines. We can also help test by doing static analysis, by doing pseudo localization unit tests, and we can also test the final in context results and do the right remediation. We're here to do trainings as well. These are the tools we use. Globalizer is the scanning and static analysis tool. We can identify the issues directly in the code. Localizer can help us do pseudo localization testing. And we can also send the files to translation or even to MT to see how it looks like before localization, or to help localization. And Localizer QA allows us to see the final product in its full context in a different language. And that's it. So I have been going on, and I'd like to know if you have any questions.
All right, Milen, there are already a couple of questions.
Okay.
All right. Okay, the first one here is, when would you use UTF-16 versus UTF-8? That's a pretty a knowledgeable question. You might want to start with just reviewing character, just like 2 sentences of character encoding for those who didn't take any of that in during the webinar.
Yeah, UTF-8, UTF-16. There are a lot of different options. Most common is UTF-16. So what I would do is, especially if you're using databases are going to actually support all of them. But if you have also third-party tools, see what they would be supporting. You will want to, by default, I would say you want to go with UTF-16 over UTF-8, because that is going to give you a wider base of all the characters that you need.
For everybody involved, just really briefly, UTF-16 assigns 2 bits regularly, and let's say you had a complex Chinese character, you might put 2 UTF-16 instances together to create the character. Now, it is important to note that the conversion between UTF-8 and UTF-16 is really easy. So let's say you have a really concerned about database storage. You might go with UTF-8 in the database and then convert to 16 later on. That's what I would add. The reason why you go with UTF-8 is, instead of like the letter A being 16 bits long, you'd only use 8 bits in that capability. But more and more, like storage and that kind of thing is just not that much of an issue. But it really depends a little bit. Like, there are sometimes when there are mobile applications where that's a concern. Anyway, did I help with that, Milen, or did I stick my foot in my mouth?
That's good.
Okay. Is there any open source library to generate pseudo of text? I do have to say, because it's in my blood. Localizer and even Globalizer, to an extent, will create pseudo localizations for you to test with. But one of the most important things is, as a developer, unless you can see the impacts of what you're doing, it's really hard to take in to really develop and do so in a way that is supporting multiple languages. Pseudo localization is the sort of the cheap and easy way to do this, but it's hardly the only thing you should be doing. Everyone should be pseudo localizing that's on this call. There are open source libraries. Google puts out a good one. However, understand that to create that, you're going to have to put work into it. And you're also going to have to really think about the conditions of how you expand text for different markets and the like. So it's not like a slam dunk, hey, I'm going to grab this thing from, SourceForge or wherever, and I'm going to plug it in and it's going to work. So anyway, Milen, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I mean, I've seen some development teams create their own, but just putting accents is not enough. We need to think of expansion and the concatenations part too. So it does require a little bit of effort to build that.
Good. All right. Do you think machine translation, pre-translation could replace pseudo-localization? What are the pseudo-localization advantages over pre-translating content? This is a subject I love. Do you mind if I take a first hack at it?
Okay.
All right. So I agree that we should be pre-translating with machines. It's inexpensive enough to do it. I also, have seen really good evidence that if one takes the time, and we do this for some of our customers, if one takes the time to tailor the machine translation a bit to your application. So like, I have a coat of paint, for instance. Coat is obviously could be literally translated many different ways. So to be able to put in not just terminology, but context into a machine translation engine, you can do it. And you can also have a feedback loop that makes that machine translation better and better. That's something we offer. However, I look at it as like for really dynamic applications, there are applications where they're like having new little releases like every few hours, every few days. It's sort of a shame not to take on the thought like, hey, I will publish my software on Monday and by Wednesday I'll have it human reviewed, right? So the idea is you give the various markets, the latest and greatest, which is exciting, and kind of have that small percentage chance that, maybe a word is bad, but then you correct it by Wednesday. Now, the developers really, really like this. They like to be able to open the application, actually see it in Chinese, even if they can't read the Chinese. Now, so it's just sort of like a good feedback loop for the developers. Now, on the other side, why would you do that and not it's not an either or. You would do pseudo localization. The reason is that the developers need to see that things expand. And first of all, they can read and understand a pseudo localization. It's going to have, let's assume the developers are in the US or speak English really well, which is not always a good assumption, but they will see the source string in English in the center of that pseudo-localized string. So they actually can navigate the application and see what it is. So if they're working on a feature, they can say, hey, this works, and click on it, and it's all good. The other thing is a pseudo-localization is going to have an open bracket and a closed bracket at the end. So the developers can see, hey, did I cut this off? If they see it in, say, German, and they don't speak German, they might not see that they've cut off the last word because there's no closed bracket around that. So there's no sort of feedback loop there. So pseudo-localization, again, I wouldn't say it's one versus the other, but I like it's like if I'm leading a team, I'm going to pre-translate with tools that also with machine translation, but I'm also going to use the pseudo-localization. Locale, a good one for that is, I think it's .io, it's Esperanto. Nobody translates into Esperanto, so you're safe making that your pseudo. We once had somebody using Icelandic, and then they needed Icelandic. Go figure, right? Anyway, I'm talking too long, but use both. They're both really good. You would need a mechanism, which we have, to retranslate something that was machine translated. So it's not that's what holds people back, and fear of a mistranslation is what holds people back on using machine translating and pre-translating. They're afraid something wrong will slip through. So there's control.
I just want to add one thing to what you said on the part about would you use MT over pseudo localization? And I totally agree with you for the concatenations and catching that. You cannot do it with MT, so you need pseudo localization. As to the expansion part, pseudo localization gives you all of the expansion, but I've seen one interesting use of MT for that in one of the projects, and this particular development team decided to use localizer YAP for doing the pseudo localization and seeing things. But for the expansion, they knew which languages they were going to, and they just emptied it to be able to find the longest string from each of the languages that they have, because they were quite limited in real estate. So instead of using a rule of thumb for expansion, in case you want to see how it looks in every language, you can pick the longest string with MT and then adjust from there, which was an interesting use.
Good. I'm going to add one more thing because I can't help myself. Nobody's asking about static analysis, but what that means is as the developers are writing code, either within their IDE or during a commit, which for developers, that's the equivalent of, say, saving, or during a pull request, that's, hey, I think I've done this development now, I'm going to submit this to my peers to have a look at it. We can make static analysis show up in what the developer does. And so exactly what they're working on, what they're doing now, they see some internationalization results. And remember, pseudo localization is not going to uncover everything. It's also sort of like a testing loop. It's very important, but it's late in the process. If the developer sees an I18n issue during development, first of all, it's going to uncover more things. Second of all, it's easy to take action on it. If I've written, say, 100 lines of code, which is a pretty good day for a developer, and I'm going to create a commit, and I automatically see in my commit report, hey, you use this function and it's not going to display the calendar class, or I forgot to pass locale into this class, or whatever it is. It's really quick for that developer to correct that there. And what happens is when you have visibility at that level, remember, in a pull request, they're submitting it to their other workers, that their team that works with them. It changes the cultural aspect of internationalization within the thinking, the psyche of the development department, because, hey, I don't want any bugs or issues reported next to the code I write. That's just how it works, So I would encourage everybody to look into static analysis. That would be Globalizer in our case, because of that feedback. Remember, when your developers are working, you can be sure that they're getting feedback on the security of their application, on various coding quality measurements during those same processes I mentioned. And that visibility helps them be better, right? So internationalization is just another user experience. It's just another piece of coding quality to expect. All right. Are there additional potential issues with right to left languages?
Oh, yeah.
Take it.
Quite a lot of issues, because right to left languages to begin with are not even going to be right to left. They're going to be bidirectional. So when you insert an English word, or could be just the name of a company, say IBM, now the text direction has to follow the text direction of IBM. So you go right to left, you need to switch to left to right, and then go right to left again. So that is pretty complex, and I've seen some tools and technologies sometimes that do support it, but it has another feature where you need to add a comment and it's forgotten in the comment, and things get all messed up. Also with those languages, you need to remember that numbers also differ. So Arabic numbers look different than the 0, 1, 2, 3 that you know. So there's more formatting involved and display issues. And again, going back to parsing. So it's not only how you display the code, but also, first of all, how will a user enter Arabic content? And as they enter it, how is it going to be parsed? So we're planning, we don't have the date yet, but to do a webinar about right to left all by itself, because that's a pretty large topic.
That'll be a good webinar. Cool. All right. All right. What are the main issues to, I'm just going to mention we're at our 1 hour mark, but we have so many good questions that I'm just going to keep going. And if you have to log off, I mean, again, we'll send you the recording, but anyway, all right. What are the main issues to take into account before adding Asian languages?
Okay. Well, you have everything that you need with all the other languages, the non-Asian languages, or the, let's call them European or Eastern European languages. But with Asian languages, now you have a lot larger of a character set, and that makes absolutely a Unicode a must. So that is one area. The other area is how you're going to be inputting these characters. There are tooling available today, but you need to consider that just having a keyboard like the one you have is not a slam dunk. There are different input entry methods, whether it's a pinyin for the Chinese, and there's a few different ways based on hitting the keystrokes of how a brush goes. That could be one method. Romanji to katakana to hiragana and kanji is another way. So definitely how you will be entering your data is important. But the other thing to keep in mind with Asian languages is on the UI design side, character corruption could be a big one, which is why with pseudo localization we test with those languages as well. But also Asian languages, the kanji, for example, tend to be taller. So while we've talked about expansion horizontally, you now have the issue of expanding vertically because of the character sizes. So you want to test it. You could do an MT translation too and see how everything lays out and see if that works. With Asian languages, address formats in Japan could be the reverse. You have to see what the application is and if the audience would be quite okay using the order that we're used to, but you may need to actually flip it depending on that. There's also the vertical character layouts, which we don't see very often, but again, depending on what the end product is, that's also another thing that would need to be supported. When you go into Japan, particularly, and now you have to list state. State is the prefecture in Japan. There is a whole list. Typically, in our drop-downs, we list things alphabetically, but in the prefectures, the way they're listed is not alphabetical. There is an official order to how the prefectures need to be listed. I think it's more geographical, so there is a very specific way on how that happens. And also, I talked about colors, imagery. Yeah, so quite a lot to consider.
Really good.
But
I didn't know
still,
that.
but still, I would say right to left seems to be more difficult. In terms of complexity, I would say going to Asia first is easier than going to right to left.
I didn't know that about the prefectures. That's cool. All right. I'm also, just adding to that, sometimes we see like developers will hard code a font selection, and that really messes you up in those cases. All right. Oh boy, this is good to me here. What percentage of I18n issues does static analysis uncover, and are false positives an issue? All right, dear to my heart. So this is like the most common objection. It also happens to have been the most common objection for any static analysis solutions, the threat of false positives. And it's real. I mean, the deal is that any development is going to have unique capabilities or unique cases of itself, unique styles and the like. Think of the language that people use. People have different writing styles and the like. It's the same for programming, and that involves programming language, different issues, and whether something is actually user-facing or not, whether something might not be user-facing, but still it moves a variable, and so internationalization needs to be thought of, and that's not always black and white, right? Or something is like a debug statement, so never seen by anybody but a developer. Static analysis needs to have controls to allow you to deal with that. But it also means a little bit of work has to be put in to tailor static analysis so it works for the team. Now, that's saying what happens like in globalizers, you have all these default rules for various programming languages, and even subset of rules like, JavaScript versus TypeScript and the like. So you have these top level areas, and then you have the ability to create hierarchies within those rules that are specifically custom to a team and the like. And so often, as part of a globalizer engagement with our software, we'll help developers with that. But people can do it themselves also. Most of our clients end up doing it themselves, and we get them started on it. Now, I mentioned scanning code as you're writing it, and that is the best way. That is really powerful, because if you're aiming something at either a file or an entire set of repositories, the developer is going to be like, well, I'm not working on that right now, so this is just noise for me, right? And so you're naturally going to get more false positive thinking around, hey, I'm scanning 1 million lines of code, or even 250,000 lines of code, and all I cared about was this 100 lines of code I'm working on, right? So you really want to focus the developer on where they're working now. It's fine if, when we do an I18n project and somebody's never internationalized, we're going to throw it at everything, and then we're going to kind of sift through that, and then we're going to kind of fine tune to get down to what we care about, right? That's very useful, right? But in terms of your organization, you want to use static analysis on what are you working on right now, because that's the nature of agile development. Anything out of what I'm working on right now is out of scope. So you want to keep thinking that way. And naturally, if let's say you have three things that are detected in 100 lines of code, it's just not a big deal to, click on ignore, 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 and then it's ignored forever, right? If it's false positive. So no big deal. Even if you have the worst static analysis around, it's no big deal. It's three things, click, click, click. It's not an issue. However, fine tuning really makes that very good and very useful. And the developers are used to working with static analysis tools, but know that every single static analysis tool, whether it's used for security or coding constructs and the like, the very initial objection is going to be too many false positives. I don't want to deal with it. Very natural. All right. What do you think? This is our last question, and then we're like way over. What do you think on displaying key IDs to the highest missing translate? Well, I'm not sure I understand this. What do you think on displaying key IDs to highlight missing translation? Is this better than having a fallback language? Sometimes I feel we can miss some missing translations, updates of the text, because we have no clue to spot these issues when the product is live. Very good. For example, Spanish could show text in English because it is developer fallback language. So is there no way to know if that's hard-coded or just a missing translation? Boy, our software will detect that pretty darn fast, by the way. Go ahead, Milen, you might want to answer that in a more generic fashion.
I think fallbacks is definitely something you build in. And the fallback hierarchy may also include that you don't just fall back to English. If you have, say, US Spanish, then the fallback for that instead of US English is probably going to be just Spanish, because you have someone who can read Spanish better than English. That's why they chose US Spanish to begin with. So there is a whole logic of how you want to do the fallbacks. But to answer the question of, is this just a fallback or is it a missed string? I would go back to, again, pseudo localization to find out if it's a missed string. There will be, when there's a missed string, of course, it goes to the fallback, but is that really what you want? Adam, do you have something to add?
No, just, it's, one of the things that, in addition to localizer will do is it analyzes the files that you're sending for translation, and it will find things like, hey, we're missing something, and it'll analyze it both before it goes out for translation and when it's returned, because again, you don't want an automated process that now is going to cause more problems for you than not. So you want to analyze it for things like duplicate string IDs and broken character encoding and, yes, missing translations. You want to analyze that and track that and be able to show that to, in this case, it would be to the localization manager, whether that's actually somebody with that title or somebody sort of in the product line caring for that. So that kind of stuff is shown, and if it's a really bad error that's going to like break the code, we'll actually stop the process rather than just indicate it, because the last thing we want is for localization to break something and then the developers get all upset for good reason. So anyway, really great questions. Milen, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered
Okay,
it.
good. For those of you that stayed on an extra 15 minutes, thank you very much. Again, we'll get you out a recording if you want to share that with other people in your organizations. And if you want to talk with us to help make globalization and internationalization a little bit more visible within your company and build some actual automated practices around that, we'd love to help you. Thank you again. And Milen, great job. Really thorough presentation. Really excited. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining.